Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, still trying to figure out why you were never able to successfully meld country and rap in the late 90s, or else a scrappy upstart, trying to figure out why you can't successfully meld emo and math rock, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of September 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Saunders who drove an El Camino with purple racing stripes, and who was always trying to make you an accessory after the fact to one of his mail fraud schemes. And old Saunders would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights. So, including many people who are listeners to this podcast, by the way. Come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of every month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show in that way. I very much appreciate it. If you're not in a place where you can support the show in that way, I totally get it. You can still support us for free by doing one of these two things. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, preferably a good one. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. Thanks so much for supporting the show, and I really hope that you enjoy this week's chat. Our guest this week is a journeyman musician whose deft blend of folk and rock music have earned him a dedicated following around the world. Matt Nathanson got his start in San Francisco's fertile music scene of the late 1990s. In 2008, he broke through with a smash hit, Come On Get Higher, which would eventually go platinum. He's recorded for Acrobat, Universal, and Vanguard Records. He's appeared on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and The Ellen DeGeneres Show. He's performed with John Mayer, Matchbox 20, Counting Crows, The Fray, Train, and many others. Parade magazine calls him a master storytelling songwriter, and NPR says his catalog is already filled with a variety of anthems, and the hooks, which he seemingly has an endless supply of, are his secret weapon. I got a chance to catch up with Matt on the phone last week to hear about his journey so far. Matt Nathanson, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You are professionally associated with California. That's the way that I've always associated you, but you grew up on the East Coast in Massachusetts originally. What did music look like in your household growing up?
It's funny. We didn't do much music at my house, but when I was a kid, pretty early on, I started. MTV changed every kid our age. Like I don't know, you were probably around the same age,
Yeah.
and MTV just like changed the way the world was. And so I remember the first concert I ever went to. The student teacher in my third grade class overheard her talking about. So in Boston, when you grow up and you like rock music, there's like the trifecta, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's Aerosmith, Boston, and the Jay Giles Band. When you grew up in the 70s, and so I remember hearing my student teacher, who was like 21, and she was at my public school, and I overheard her talking like, "Oh, I have an extra ticket for the Jay Giles concert." And I was in third grade, and I like walked up and I was like, "I'd love to take that ticket." And and she was sort of cool enough and progressive enough. This was 1981 to be like, "Sure, but let's ask your mother and father and see." And my mom was like, "Okay." And so they dropped me at her teaching college, and then I went with a bunch of her friends, like in a car, to see the Jay Giles Band at the Boston Garden, and then like they dropped me off at home at like 2 a.m. or whatever. And it was sort of a seminal moment. I was such a huge fan of music at that point, but that kind of changed the game for me. Kiss was the big gateway drug, and then all of a sudden I saw Jay Giles in third grade and I was like, I have to do this. So I would just start learning guitar and piano in like fourth and fifth grade. But my family was not like my grandfather was a singer and he was a performer, but my immediate household wasn't really a musical place. Listen to the radio or maybe listen to like Annie and Oliver or whatever, like, soundtracks.
Right.
But it wasn't like we all sat around and played music. My mom didn't play an instrument. My brother, my sister, nobody did. So it was just this weird thing that I always felt like it was sort of my family. Music was always the thing that rooted me in like non-anxious, like, it was a great way to soundtrack my life. I have a song called Headphones that's about how I feel invincible with my headphones on. When I was a kid, as soon as the Walkman was invented, I never ever took it off. Like I think I had it on for coming on. I'm almost 50, so I still do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. You can say, wow, this teacher just took me to this gig and it was kind of a nice thing. But it sounds like, I think all people who end up playing music, they need that one experience that really lights them on fire, that shows them. And for listeners who are younger, it's probably hard to understand how huge a band like Jay Giles Band was in 1981, not to mention in Boston at the Garden. So that's really cool. She made a big difference in your life to have given that to you.
Yeah, it was pretty bananas. And then in fifth grade, even to take it like a couple steps further. And again, like back then, you couldn't access any of the things. It's hard to imagine, like you said. We had Hit Parader and Circus and Cream and Rolling Stone, but it was like these were mythical beings, even more so than they are now because there was no access to them, and it was sort of it went down a very curated, track. And I went in fifth grade. I was put into boarding school, and and I was there fifth grade all the way through up until, and then I went to college. But I started meeting teachers there that would take me to shows. So you would be spending the 5 nights a week at this school, and then I'd go home for 2 nights on the weekends. But during the week, it would be like it was almost like Dead Poets Society. It was kind of Dead Poets Society. It was like fifth through ninth grade was all boys, and they're fucking ruthless. And it was like I didn't really, I mean, I had friends, but I wasn't really a part of any group. And so I would befriend teachers, and then I'd say, hey, the Monkees are coming, or U2's coming, or, like Robert Cray. I would see any show I could. And I think because my mother would sort of always fund these things, I think because she felt bad that I was in boarding. I think she felt bad for putting me in fucking boarding school at 9. But it was kind of awesome. It was like I got to go see all these shows during the week with these teachers. So I saw Suzanne Vega, I saw 10,000 Maniacs, I saw, and all these bands in kind of the mid to late 80s, all with sort of educators from my school. And I'm still close with a bunch of them to this day. And it was great because my brother and sister weren't particularly brother and sisterly. And, and so it was nice to have these older people that sort of represented like sort of authority figures, but also really cool people, who could, like the first time I discovered Suzanne Vega and Sinead O'Connor was through this woman who I'm still very close with, who was working in admissions at the time, and she was a super nerd for music, and we started talking. She's like, well, have you ever heard Sinead O'Connor, Lion and the Cobra? And I got that record, and it was like, what is that? As a kid who grew up listening to like Poison, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, all of a sudden there was this new folk movement that was happening, and it just changed the way I saw music because all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, the lyrics don't have to be like gasoline, you want to pump me. Like they can do something, they can be a little bit more substantial. And not that that's not substantial. I mean, pumping someone is definitely a substantial experience, but you know what I'm saying? It was like,
Yeah.
so it was pretty rad. It was a rad time. I was fortunate, like you said, to have people that changed the shape of and I was also a fairly driven kid in that way. So I was seeking it out. I was hungry for that kind of connection and to see music. Yeah.
Well, you must have been driven because, I mean, your first album, Please, you couldn't have been more than 20 years old when it comes out. So that's a very early start. When did music start to go from something that you were listening to, that you were inspired by, that you were bonding with, teachers over, to something that you were going to do yourself?
I knew it from the minute I started playing. So I took piano lessons in fifth grade. In third grade, we had a lip sync contest that I started where everybody built their instruments out of cardboard, and we would have two lip sync bands. And so by fifth grade, I was able to take piano lessons, and then I quickly kind of ditched those. And in sixth grade, I started taking guitar, and then I had my first band in seventh grade. And I just sort of knew that I wanted to do it. I think at the time I probably wanted to be larger than life and have this experience, but I think it was driven by this love of like I just wanted to be in there. I just wanted to be a part of the mix, and it was so intoxicating. I mean, as for yourself, it's like one of the most incredible things in the world to be somewhat of a compulsive person, but then to find something that kind of feeds that in a really healthy way. And so I could just dig in, and you could put on and it was the dawning of the CD kind of in like seventh, eighth grade. And I just remember listening to things over and over and over and over and over again. And like until I knew every fiber of the record and I knew every liner note in the thing. And then I'd go see them live. It was just so in 1993, when I made Please, it started to be like CDs became a thing that you could make, which was magical. Again, like as time has progressed for us, it's like things they've broken down the barriers between. I mean, it's happening now at a rapid rate. But then there were these sort of things where it was like, oh, you can actually make one of these. Like, and we knew we could make things, but not really. And I had a friend in college whose dad was like the CEO of Toys R Us, so he was a recording engineer, and he had bought a bunch of gear, and he was a really great guitar player. And he graduated and then moved to like Van Nuys, and I went and made my record in his house. And it was like I couldn't believe we were making a record in a house. Like I couldn't believe I was and I bought my first real guitar, in like 91. Before that, I was playing this kind of junky guitar, acoustic. But it was just this rad thing where I would continually move forward through this, uh, like it was like bushwhacking, you know what I mean? You sort of like thwack your way through this thing, and you'd get like, I got a Kramer. I remember I got an Ibanez, like a K-shaped Ibanez when I was a kid. And then my first acoustic guitar was this sort of junky Eterna, but I would start playing songs like that and write lyrics. And I wrote my first song in maybe fifth grade. And it just kept kind of, and it was just the only thing I knew I wanted to do. It was the only thing I really ever committed to. And I did it like entirely. Like I would get up in front of my school assembly and be like, just want to let you know the new David Lee Roth record's out today. It's called Skyscraper. You know what I mean? Like I was that kid. I was just so into it. I couldn't believe anybody else wouldn't want to know every fucking thing about everything.
Right. And I don't want to turn this into older dudes tell younger people listening to the show what it used to be like. But again, it bears mentioning what a sea change that was to have the ability to, I mean, now there's 50,000 songs a day uploaded to Spotify or whatever the hell, whatever depressing number it is.
Right.
But back then, like that ability to say, well, not only can you record this in your friend's house, which that's a new thing as well, but this can be pressed to CD, like the main medium with which people listen to, like this is now available to you. That's a sea change. And it is inspiring to be at that age and know that if you make something, it's not necessarily just going to stay in your bedroom and your mom listens to it. It's going to, other people could hear it.
Right. And it's funny, that's what the new generation has, this amazing thing. And it's like, which is at your fingertips, you can create without, and it really like brings down all the walls between you and the thing that you love. And it's pretty magical, actually. And if I was a kid now, I'm sure I would be, just doing things in a room constantly, learning how things worked or whatever. But there is an element of there's an element of quality that happens now that's kind of nice. At the same time, it's also delusional because it gives people the concept that like I did this so I can be this, and right, which is like just isn't true. I tell this to my kid all the time. It's like if you love something, you have to do it a lot, and it's like you have to really commit to it and you have to master it. And becoming a jack of all trades and a master of none is sort of like we live in a culture where people are winning TV shows and going viral in a certain way, and it gives the illusion that like that is a plateau to get to and then kind of stay on, when really I think mastery of a craft is, and it does make me sound like the oldest person in the world, but I have to say that like the mastery of a craft through the 10,000 hours idea. And it's like, and now what's great about now is that there's no borders between learning. You can YouTube stuff, you can get online courses, you can download software on your phone and record. I mean, there's so many great records happening like that, but those should be tools that enable you to continue to do that work, which is what I love about now. Because back then there was this illusion that it was like, well, we can't do that. And when you get in the studio, like my first record cost first major label record on Universal was like $360,000. And it's like, and it was indulgent, it was fun, but like that's insanity. Like but that's the time we lived in then, and now we're in this great place. But I think the work is still very important to the craft.
And you're right. Like there are pitfalls to that ubiquity and availability to kids of all this stuff. And you even think about if it were to go really well for a kid who puts up something in their early 20s and it blows up and it goes viral. Well, if you just have that one song or you don't have any of the ability behind it, I mean, we all experience imposter syndrome to some degree, but I can't imagine what it would be like to have something blow up and go viral when you have nothing behind it to like really. Now you got to go out and do a 90-minute show. How are you going to do that? You know what I mean?
Dude, and even crazier than that is like you kind of like doing this, and I call them in our business. There's tourists, right? And some tourists have made entire careers out of it. Like they've sort of like had kind of a hit, and they don't really want to do it, but they do it, and then they have another hit, and they don't really want to do. It's like there's this sort of tourist thing that happens where. And then at a certain point they go, you know what, this isn't really what I want to do. I want to like write screenplays and it's like, which is totally valid. And I back I back a good change of horses midstream. But in this culture, there's this idea that if the tourist has a successful moment, it doesn't solve any of the problems. It just kind of like puts a hyper light on something that maybe you don't even really like doing. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's a fascinating time. And again, this has happened for decades. I mean, there's been bands for a long time, our whole life who weren't really in it for that, but they thought like, what else going to do? And it's like nothing's changed in the humanity part of it, but there's just an accelerated, there's no tail on anything. It's just sort of like, bam, this is happening. And then it's like, bam, and all that attention. And so there are new muscles that have to be worked that like you're saying, like, I would hate to be a kid right now and have it's incredible. And at the same time, it's really difficult because you're putting things out and they go nowhere. And then something might go somewhere. And then you get the illusion that, oh my God, this is happening. I might be somebody. And it's like, no, it's a long throw game like everything else. It's like, it really is there's no lottery wins. Do you know what I mean? And so everything has its sort of back end that makes it more difficult, whether it's a very long career of sort of a gradual taking the stairs approach. And then there's also the ones where it's like it sort of jet rockets you up there and then it kind of kills all the fun and all the, and then it's tough. It's a weird time, but no weirder than it was then. It's just like, it's louder.
It is. And I think we've both known the people over the years who do have that rocket ship ride to the moon. You were kind of, listeners can't see it, but basically like this not logarithmic, rather, like they get huge immediately, right? And that's great. But the problem with that, like you're saying, there's a cost for all this stuff. The problem is when you get huge in 6 months, it's awesome, but now nothing for the next 20 years can compare to that first 6 months. Like
Totally.
You squeezed all the greatness into that 6 months for you, and you'll spend a long time chasing the dragon if you don't get your head on right.
It's funny. I'll be honest. Even having a hit song for me, 20 years into my career or whatever it was, I think I had the delusion that I thought like, okay, cool. This is it. This is the beginning of the next bunch of these things. And everybody that has a hit song that goes to pop radio that didn't have one before, it's hard to not feel like, oh my God, I'm one of these people. Like you're playing radio shows with people and you start to feel like, oh my God, these are my peers. And there's this realization that like, you just because you're in that pool for a little bit doesn't mean that those are your people, doesn't mean that this is your thing, doesn't mean that they're your peers. And it's a fascinating thing that happens now with like TikTok and Instagram and that kind of stuff. And it's like there's this feeling that like, oh, I do that too. Like that's what I do. And it's like, number one, no, it isn't. And number two, I had a successful song, a couple, in this sort of period. And I think I always thought after that, I was like, oh yeah, no, I get this now. I get how this works. This is going to be great. I know, like I did it. I finally did it on my own. And it's like, from here on out, it's going to be this way. And it just isn't. Nothing is that way. And, COVID really taught us that. But like the line is not a straight line. And so it's all about kind of the experience you're having and less about the goals you're looking for. You know what I mean? In a kind of a Zen way.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Whether working on his own or writing with other artists, Matt really seems to give himself over to his creative work. He waited a long time for a song that would connect on a global scale. That patience was rewarded, but I'm sure it wasn't without initial costs. Creative work requires a lot of sacrifice, and there's a wonderful poem by Robert Bly that describes how that sacrifice can intersect with your personal life. It's entitled, Starting a Poem. You're alone. Then there's a knock on the door. It's a word. You bring it in. Things go okay for a while, but this word has relatives. Soon they turn up. None of them work. They sleep on the floor and they steal your tennis shoes. You started it. You weren't content to leave things alone. Now the den is a mess and the remote is gone. That's what being married is like. You never receive your wife only, but the madness of her family. Now see what's happened? Where is your car? You won't be able to find the keys for a week. There's a big span in between that first album that you record in Van Nuys in 92, 93, and then you sign with Universal in 2002. It seems like there's like a decade-long period there where you are learning that craft to kind of, graduate from AAA to the big leagues. So what did that decade look like right then? And what were the skills as a songwriter, as a performer, as someone who was operating a small business? What were the things that you were having to learn in that period and get better at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was in San Francisco after college and I just was sponging up every bit of information that I could get. And I think I was more malleable than if I could tell my younger self, I'd tell him a couple things, but one of them would be like, stay the course of the thing that you believe and don't be knocked around by the information you get. Like, take the information you get, sift out the stuff that you need, but don't let it sort of change the shape of the goal, like not the goal, but the shape of like who you are. And I think for that 10 years, I was in San Francisco at a time where like the San Francisco scene was incredible. It was post American Music Club, Red House Painters, this kind of, and Chris Isaac. It was post kind of the 80s gloomy, sort of rad, rainy day, sad music. But it was coming into this thing where like Train was coming up and playing clubs, and I'd play with them, Counting Crows, Third Eye Blind. There was just this like, there were a lot of, and then there were a lot of incredible songwriters, Sean Hayes. Like, we do open mics and it would be like me and Sean Hayes and MK Ultra and Creeper Lagoon. There's a lot of alternative music coming up. And so all I did was just like take it all in and just play anywhere anybody wanted me to play. And I would work a day job, and I worked a day job that sort of just paid the bills and didn't tax me in any way. And I just started kind of doing little tours where I'd go, like on a Thursday, I'd fly somewhere to Boston and play like 3 shows and then fly home. And I was just kind of like building and taking in as much as I could. And then waiting. It's funny because the singer-songwriter, the white guy guitar thing really was not a thing. The alternative version of that was, but like the Jack Johnson Mayer, the thing that like where I kind of found my audience, whether or not that was my kind of music or not, like it to me, but I found my audience in there, and that didn't happen till 2001, 2000. Like there was kind of a rebirth of that happened. Before that, it was like, oh, you got to be a band. You should be a band. You got to be a band. And then all of a sudden, Jack Johnson shows up and Mayer shows up, and there's this groundswell of Aware Records on in the Midwest and the East Coast. And so for me, I was just kind of like doing anything I could, anytime I could, playing restaurants to nobody plugged into an amp, driving a very long way to play to nobody, and then driving home. But just the act of doing that, because I was such a nerd for it, was in and of itself like I felt like I was making it,
Yeah.
like. And so then all of a sudden, when the Mayor thing happened and Aware Records happened, and all of a sudden it started changing the shape of stuff, and I got involved in that group, there was a nice moment of like, oh man, I've been waiting for this. Like I toured the country with John Doe and Marty Wilson Piper from the Church two separate times, and like got booed, and like it was nice of both those people to take me out. I love John, and Marty was a blast, but like those were not my people. So I'd be playing my songs and people would be flipping me off, and then I'd sell like 6 T-shirts or 6 CDs, and I'd think I had won the fucking war. So then all of a sudden to go and play the House of Blues in Chicago, sold out, first of three, with like me, then Howie Day, then Mayer, and play a set and sell absolutely everything I had and leave with like an empty duffel bag. I felt like I felt like I'd walk through a fucking portal in time to like a magic land. And that was really what it was. Like before that, it was so I was playing every, like Bimbo's, this club in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Someone would come without an opener, I would take that slot. So like Fiona Apple came and did a spot right when that first record, her title, was happening, and I opened that show, and that worked. Like certain shows would work and I'd be like, oh my God, this is great. And then I'd go back to playing the Laundromat, every Friday night to like 15 people. And it wasn't like, none of it was bad. It was all amazing. It was amazing to play the fucking Laundromat. It was amazing to play for Fiona Apple. And my manager at the time was plugged in San Francisco. So he would kind of get me as many local gigs as I could get. And you just sort of build this confidence, and you woodshed, and you figure out what does and doesn't work. And then all of a sudden, like this Mayer thing happened. And then I got to tour with him and got to tour with Howie. And all of a sudden I was plugged into a group of kids that I was like, oh my God, I think these are the kids that like the kind of music that I make. And I'd never seen them before. I like had no, it was like coming to like off an island, being like, holy shit, there's planes and land, and wait, you can just call someone on a phone. It was like I had just come out of space and into this place where all of a sudden everybody liked the thing I did. It was pretty great.
Well, that's funny. I like the idea of the portal between those two things, because what's interesting, before you found that audience, while you're doing the John Doe tour where you're not linking up with his audience and they're hating it, that audience that will be at the House of Blues to listen to your music and buy everything that you have, they're still latently there in the world. You know what I mean? It's not like they appeared out of nowhere. They're there, and you had to find a way as an artist to just keep on going, stay alive, don't die, so that you can find your way to that group of people that appreciate you. And it sounds like it made all the difference.
It really did, because I was down with driving in a car across the country like by myself and sleeping on people's floors. Like that was amazing. Like, and then the emo scene was happening too, and I was friendly with a bunch of those, so I'd play with some of those kids, and you'd play like a living room show, and that was another group of very passionate kids, like people who loved emo, like early emo, like Jimmy Eat World and Far and like Sunny Day. Like you would play these shows, and all of a sudden I was like, well, these kids are amazing too. Like they like it when you just spill your guts, and you feel this feedback. And I remember saw a Dashboard Confessional sticker in this girl's car and just being like, God, maybe I should be a name of a band. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard, like Dashboard Confessional. And I didn't really know Dashboard at all. It was prior to the success that he had. And it was like, but that was another scene that I kind of loosely tapped into. And I was like, oh, fuck, well, these people like music too. And it was like, yeah, trying to find your people. And that was what it was. It was like a search for your people, which I think is kind of the eternal search that we do as humans anyway. But it was neat when it connects, and you've been working so long and kind of working off of scraps to finally get like a full like dose of people that like your shit. It's incredible, because feedback like that is so galvanizing when you are, as you know, as when you make something and somebody gives you feedback on it that's positive en masse. There's this feeling of like, oh my God, yeah, wait, I might be worth it. Because we do have that's why we do this. I think there's no other reason why we would get up in front of people and be like, love me. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's an element of there's a deficit going on. And so when you get that push back, you're like, holy shit, this is really exciting. And so, and then that takes different shapes or whatever. But
Now, as you're making that journey from where you started to finding that audience, can you kind of talk about the parallel creative journey that you're on at the same time, and what are you learning on just a very basic songwriting level? What did you have to improve on as a songwriter, like on a technical level, to be able to make songs that were compelling on a regular basis for this audience that you would find?
whew, that's a great question. I like to think that I didn't evolve as a songwriter until really late in the game. Like
Okay.
I sort of survived on my thing, whatever that was, and it was a bit of a jalopy, like those first bunch of records, until I started co-writing heavily, which
Oh,
didn't happen until I co-wrote with a buddy of mine from college, and he and I wrote a bunch of stuff on the Universal record, and then some at Hope, and then Modern Love. So there's like 2 or 3 records there, 4 records where we wrote together, and it was really fun. But I don't think I understood the craft of things until I started really co-writing with people whose job it was to co-write all the time. And there was this element of like being in the room with somebody who is better than you. Uh, Not that Mark wasn't better than me when we wrote together on certain things, but like when you're in a room with somebody whose 10,000 hours are based around like writing fucking songs every day, there's an element of like, and I think I'm a late bloomer when it comes to learning things as well. I'm not a I'm kind of a what's the like I can't see the forest for the trees. That's how I lived my whole life. So I would write these songs and someone would say, it's the kind of thing where someone will say like, oh well, when you go to that minor chord, it's dark. Like that's what a dark that gets kind of dark. And I'll be like, it does, and I knew that like an E minor felt, but when somebody said it, I was like, of course, a minor, because you take this thing out and it becomes so, but I almost like it wasn't that I just my brain doesn't function that way. And so simple things like when I started to co-write and somebody would go, oh, well, this goes like this. And the reason that U2 songs are so great is because this does this. And all of a sudden I started to see the science behind it as well as the magic behind it. That was a really great moment. And I think that it wasn't arrogance, it was just blind drive and I didn't have the opportunity and anxiety. So I didn't have the opportunity to like write with other people. I didn't have the opportunity to like, it just never really happened. So when I started to do that, all of a sudden the world cracked open. Sort of like, and again, when I was growing up, I thought I knew music. And then I went to college in Southern California in 1991, and people were playing the Bad Brains and people were playing fucking, and all of a sudden my mind went like, I thought like, well, I know music. I know a lot about music. And then I got to college and I was like, I don't know anything about music, like
right,
Zappa, like
right.
Lou Reed, my brain is just like, and it was the same with songwriting. I was like, I write songs and but I had no idea what I was doing. And then when you start bumping against people who are professional, there's this great learning curve starts where you're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God. Well, and somebody says, no, that's because that does this. And you're like, oh my God. And before that, I'd only made records with like friends pretty much,
Right.
or I'd never asked the question. So that I see the first bunch of period of writing being a bit of a like making the best of what you've got, but what you've got is not all that. Like people love those songs and it's really great. But for me, things didn't start getting really like things didn't have a topography until like after Some Mad Hope, like after Modern Love. I feel like late in the game by like Last of the Great Pretenders, which might have been 2000, whatever, like very late, 2013 or 12, 11. And all of a sudden it was like I started to write with other people and I was like, oh, I did it all the time. And it just changed the shape of songs for me in this way that was uh, transformative and magical because there's so much like writing a song with Mike Viola and having him be like, oh, what if we did this? Or working with Butch Walker or writing with like Sean Douglas. Like these are people who like their melodic sense is way better than mine. Mine is sort of like punky and weird and two-dimensional. And all of a sudden you get in a room with somebody who understands harmony and it just changes the game. And all of a sudden it clears the fog and you're like, oh my God, wait, this is how you get to the next thing that you've always loved? Because I felt stuck before then. I was like, why is all my shit feel like this? and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, wait a second. So that was really what did it. It was pretty late in the game.
It's great to hear how that opened you up because, in a certain way, I would maybe like hypothesize that learning something like that, it could maybe like rob you of the magic because now you have like intellectualized in some way something that you just felt before. But it sounds like it did absolutely the opposite for you. Like it kind of set you on fire creatively, gave you some new tools, some new colors to paint with in a way.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for learning. Like I'm
Yeah.
a fucking sucker for it. I fight it and I like battle against it most of my life, but I really am the happiest when I'm taking in information that then I can then use without thinking about it. And so like I've been learning piano before I went on tour and it's just so rad when the piano teacher says, "Oh, well, this is just this and then the minors if you move it or the seventh chord is and I start playing it and I go and I'll say, oh, well, that's in that song or that's in that song. Like I know it because I'm a listener, I'm a
Yeah.
compulsive listener. And I'll be like, oh my God, well, that's what Coldplay does all the time, or that's very Tom Waits, or that's so Randy Newman. She's like, well, he's leading the chords, and I'll be like, oh my God, he is. And it's like it's kind of nice to demystify it because the magic doesn't change. When you hear Marie by Randy Newman, the
Mhm.
fucking magic is like embedded in that song. And so learning that he does these leading, what the chords are doing to lead to this thing and how his melody, that just sort of makes it even more fun because you feel like, oh my God, this is great. Like not only is it magical, but like you're telling me if I do this in a song, I can do this thing, or the Beatles do this. It's like the Beach Boy. It's like it's really nice to demystify something to the point of where you feel like, oh my God, wait a second, this is accessible to me. It doesn't mean I can make fucking pet sounds, but it's like, oh my God, this is accessible to me. And then at the same time, God only knows, like, no amount of knowing what Brian Wilson is capable of doing or how he does it helps you understand or get over how magical God only knows is. And this is the thing, is like, it's just such a passion that the more I know, just like reading the liner notes was so exciting when I was a kid, knowing how what the amp is and what the pedal is and how Jack White gets that thing to sound like that, but it's still fucking Jack White playing that thing, or Joni
Yes.
Mitchell does this tuning and that's it. And at the same time, you're like, yeah, but it's Joni Mitchell because it's science and magic all at the same time.
It reminds me of like when David Blaine does close up magic. He'll a lot of times he'll show you how he's doing it, and even as he shows you how he does it, it's actually only more amazing as he takes you in
Dude,
that
that's
journey.
exactly it. Like it's perfect. Close Up Magic is a great song title. And like that's the thing is like, yeah, you see it, and then there's an X element in there that makes it like very untouchable. But
Yes.
it's great.
So speaking of that X element, you alluded to it earlier that you have this hit very later in a career. It's when Some Mad Hope comes out. The single is "Come On, Get Higher," and you alluded for a bit about there was a little bit of disillusionment for you, thinking like, oh well, I've waited so long and it didn't fix all the problems in my life, or maybe I didn't immediately get to ascend to some the heights of Mount Olympus and stay there or whatever. But I'm very interested in knowing what did it feel like? What were the positive
Yeah.
the feelings at first? What did that feel like after working for nearly 2 decades to finally? I mean, you must have just been thinking to yourself, like, damn it, man, however this goes, I did the damn thing, finally.
There's a feeling that I get, and it's very rare when momentum happens in and it's independent of the thing I've done. It's not independent of, but it's like in addition to the thing I've done. It happens very rarely. And that was one of those moments where all of a sudden things started working in front of me. Like I usually run and keep pace as I'm pushing this thing, right? And then all of a sudden it took a bit of a step and all of a sudden it was in front of me. And all of a sudden I was running behind this thing that was happening. And it was and opportunities were showing up. And I don't even think, again, at the time, I think I kind of squandered even that feeling of having that experience. But that being said, there were a couple of moments where I was like, I remember playing Des Moines, Iowa on the river for a radio show, and I played Des Moines a bunch of times. and we started playing Come On Get Higher, and the crowd started singing it back to us independent. Like people had sung songs at shows, but this was a much different feeling. And I remember turning to Aaron, my guitar player, and being like, dude, I think this is what a hit feels like. And this wasn't even, this was very early days of a song. I was like, people really like this. This is crazy. They're singing this song back in a place where it's not like Boston or Chicago or San Francisco. It's like, this is Des Moines, Iowa. And I remember, so every part of having a hit is an upside, really. It's like there's no downside to it. Like for real. It's like it's really exciting. It's really fun and like and it's really neat. Your dad starts like your dad who your whole life hasn't thought what you do is valid. You know, there's an element of now
Right.
at 50, I could give a fuck what he thinks about that kind of shit. But when you're not 50, you're like, oh my God, my dad heard me at the gym. And all your relatives start saying, oh my God, I heard you. And there's a element of like validation, which is of course all false, but there's an element of validation that occurs. And independent of that, there's just this idea of like you said, you're like, oh my God, I did this thing. Like I wrote a song that I thought was a really strong song. Come On Get Higher is a song that I reworked 3 times in the studio over the course of a couple of years trying to figure it out. And then I finally figured it out, and all of a sudden it's working. And it was like it was just a magical time. And I wish that I had been more present to enjoy it. But instead I was always kind of thinking like, all right, what's the next thing? We don't want to miss this. What's the next thing? How do we but yeah, there was absolutely zero wrong with that thing happening. And I still owe most of my, I mean, like people come to my shows because of all my songs and whatever, but like Come On Get Higher, if that song didn't exist, the shape of my career would be a much different shape. And it's like, and people are like, you tired of playing it? It's like, no, I fucking wrote it. Why would I be tired of playing it? It's like, I love that song. Like it doesn't even move on the, it's like, it's just so fun to play. And it reminds me of this time in my life that I experienced, and it feels genuinely who I am. And it's like, it's fucking awesome. It's a blast.
It's funny, I'd push back a little bit when you're talking about your dad hearing the song in the gym and relatives coming to you and the validation that you're getting from them being like all kind of false. Like, like maybe some of it is for like the very core of your being. You have to be okay with yourself in a certain way that no one can affect. But it's a real thing to have friends and family recognize that what you're doing is a valid pursuit. I mean, I don't think that that's entirely,
Yeah. I
in
might
vain.
be, I might be being a little bit cold when I say that, but to me, I think when most people come up to you and tell you something about you, and this again is my perspective, which is a lens that I have, I think there are people that are happy for you, but I think because human beings are naturally self-focused beings, they're happy for themselves relating to you and how that
Ah,
relates to them. And so it doesn't really have anything to do with me. It has everything to do with their experience adjacent to me. And it's like, it doesn't mean that there aren't some people that say, it's really fun. You've always been a good human. It was really nice to see you get what you deserve. Like that, but that's rarely what people say. You know,
it's
people
more
will say,
like
like,
I can get you tickets to my cousin's show because he's a
or,
star now.
or even just like I heard you in the store and it was really cool. And what that usually means is like it was cool for me to know you and hear you in the store. And it's like, and again, no shade to that. That's like how the world works, right?
Right.
We are self-focused beings pushing around the universe in this way. But so for me, it's like I think I would have been better off in my life if I just hadn't paid any attention to that stuff. And if I paid only attention to like, does this vibrate my fucking soul? And if it does, then that is the most correct thing you can do because that's really the only North Star you need. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't fun when people would say to me, like, yeah, I heard your song or whatever, but it's usually in my family, frankly, it's a bunch of narcissists. It's usually based on like how it affects them, not my outside my immediate family. It
Mhm.
was like very much like, oh my God, you're somebody that in our circle and you're having this success. And that's, I mean, they don't know me. They never did. They never cared. So all of a sudden I had this hit and it was like they were happy for me. But if they really did the analysis, they were happy for themselves. And it's like, again, no flies on that. It's the ease of use of when you have a successful song is really nice because everybody's kind of nice to you in a
Right.
way, like even happens now at my kid's school like people be like, oh, that's Matt Nathanson. Like he plays music. He has this song and that song. And they're like, oh my God. And then everyone's kind of nice to you. I'll take it. Like I'll take an ease of
Sure.
use
Sure.
over, but that being said, it's rarely about, same with the song. People say your song is so great. It's like, it's not my song. It's like,
Right.
it's your song and it's your experience with that song. And like, that's awesome that I was able to sort of tap into something, but you're having your own experience. And I'm so psyched that I get to be a part of it in any way, because it could be anybody that
Yes.
you could be experiencing this way. But really, it's like, it's about you and it's about your thing. So anyway, that's just
Yeah.
my take on it.
No, no, that makes sense. And it's it's their song as long as the BMI check comes to my house. It's definitely their song. It sounds like, man, you really sound like you're in a pretty peaceful place with a lot of complex complex emotions to kind of to pick through. How did you arrive at that over the last decade?
I feel like I've done a lot of therapy,
Yeah,
and just to work through my own shit, and then it's coincidentally it helps everything, right? Like working on your own internal thing gives you perspective, and I just happen to be it happens to be early enough in the day that my brain hasn't overthrown me, so it's easy to
yeah,
talk like I know what I'm doing, but like really what it comes down to is like I want to die more open and more empathetic than I've been my entire life. And as a kid, watching my daughter be a young, empathetic character, I'm assuming when we were young, we had all this stuff, but I want to die like filled with wonder and like appreciation and empathy. I want to be open and I don't want to be closed. And so my goal in life in everything is this pursuit of having it go from thin, kind of closed, no bandwidth to just opening wider and wider as I go. So that by the time I'm 80, if I'm lucky enough to be 85 or 90, I can like, instead of getting pissed off when somebody's an asshole, I can be empathetic. I can be annoyed, but like I'm empathetic to their experience. You know what I mean? Like, and let me just hold on just for a second.
no, you're good.
But like that's really the thing is like so everything I do is in pursuit of that kind of expansive idea because everybody, not everybody, but so many people that I know get older and they get bitter and they are angry at the way the world's gone and and it's like I can't do that. I spent my whole life grinding against that kind of shit. And as I get older, I want to be like free. And so I'm just in pursuit of free. And it's funny, like, I think that's why I'm learning to play piano. I think that's why I want to get as much experience as I can, because through experience, you can bring down your anxiety through experience and, wood shedding on things. You bring down the level of anxiety in your life and you take away the mystery, but you don't take away the magic. And it's like, I feel like that's my whole goal is to like, because I have incredible anxiety and it's like, and I've spent my whole life terrified every time I make a transition. And so I think it's funny that the job I went into has transitions by the minute. Like I don't piss in the same toilet. I don't, you know what I mean? It's like, we
Right.
don't do that. It's like all these things give me anxiety. And so I feel like the more I can demystify all that stuff while also surrendering to the magic of it all, is like I think that's my best bet at sort of getting old in a way where I'm like much more wide open than I was during my life before that.
Well, that's really beginning with the end in mind, in a personal way. I mean, the ultimate end in mind, what's life going to be like right up to when I die? How does that dovetail, though? That's your kind of personal ambition. How does that dovetail with artistic ambitions that you still harbor? You've done a lot. I mean, you've toured the world on massive tours. You've had a hit. You did the independent thing, before then, and played every small club. You've done a lot. So what is left, on a professional level, and to be ambitious for, and how does that interact with the personal ambition that you've just described there?
Yeah. So I think that from a professional place, I like to think that the songs will dictate the goals. They'll sort of like change. So like I would love to headline the Beacon. I'd love to. There are these goals that I have that are like these weird little things that live. But I think the only way to get to those goals are to continue to like strip away the parts of the songs that aren't genuinely me and that aren't genuinely real. There's this great Ethan Hawke uh, TED talk, and I'm not one to like usually like sing the praises of Ethan Hawke, but he did this TED talk where he talked about the artist as playing the fool, and that it's our job to do and say things that people can't, even though they might feel them. And I feel like my job as an artist, and to get to the place that all my favorite artists are, like the not favorite, but songs that have stuck with me over the course of time that never go away. There's an element of like brutal, transparent honesty that has to exist. And then at the same time, it's married to melody and it's married to chords or whatever. But I sort of feel like my only goal is to continue to sort of like strip away the parts that keep me from getting to that thing. And that like wherever I end up as a creative, it has to be more, it's the same idea, more empathetic, more open, more honest, more transparent. So it mirrors this growth as a human.
Mhm.
And I think that like I like to think, and it could be wishful, magical thinking, but I like to think that if we do that as artists, that and if we design the shape of how we want to do that, that the good stuff that we want to have happen will just occur naturally over the course of this experience of like being in the creative process. And so I feel like it's endless creatively because you put on Time by Tom Waits and you're like, well, this is a perfect song. And like, I can't believe he just said, it's time, time, time. It's
Yep.
time, time, time. It's time, time, time that you love. And you're just like, and you're crying walking
Yep.
down the street. So it's like, we have miles to go. Do you know what I mean? Like to sort of touch the hem of these great things that people have done for whatever it is for ourselves. And so creatively, I feel like it's never ending. And then from a career perspective, you pick the right people to work with, and you hope you make the right decisions, and you hope you're smart. And I think in the end, the song is the master, and it's the thing that even in this time, where more so even now in this time in TikTok, it's not about Kate Bush, but
Right.
it's about that song. And it's like now more than ever, the song is God. And so the more you can be truthful and the more work you can do in pursuit of being the best version of that as you can be, then it's like that's the best chance of headlining the Beacon or being, selling a bunch of records or being on whatever your goal is. So it feels kind of limitless in that way, in a cool way.
Well, I've gotten so much from today's interview, not the least of which the idea to listen to Tom Waits' Time and weep
Oh,
openly on the sidewalk while I go to pick up my kids from school today. That'll
dude,
be
I would do it with you if you want. We can next time I'm where you, we'll hold hands and cry.
that sounds great. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate you being a part of the show, and it was an absolutely illuminating talk, and thanks for taking the time.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. It's a blast, and I love your show. It's like this has just been really great. Thanks for making it happen.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
All
Peace.
right.
This week's show was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Matt Nathanson's latest album is entitled Boston Accent, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.